There we go. We are now starting the recording. Jake reported to us that in the NASB in chapter 2, verse 3, the word rebellion from ESV is translated apostasy. There, I caught everybody up on the tape. What else? Any other observations, commands?
Cross references.
Okay.
I mean, well, this is me looking at my Life Application Bible, but there was probably in all 3 chapters like 60 cross references at least. So this is all over the place. I mean, there's a lot of, this is spoken of many times, I guess, throughout the scriptures, what this is what it's saying, right? So, yeah.
So I'm going to write 60 plus cross references according, that was Life Application Bible.
Yeah, I think that's what it is.
All right. Okay. You know, the other thing, one that I had, where did I put it in? And this was just a general observation. And Sarah and Derek, I may have included this. Okay. There's a lot of parallel concepts from this second letter to Paul's first letter. There's lots of apocalyptic references in First Thessalonians as well. So, you know what? It's a fact. It's an observation. So I put it down. Did anyone, I asked last week, did anyone look at what the first fruits are on 2:13?
You say 2:13.
Is it, or maybe 3? 2:13. We identified that term earlier as a figure of speech.
I looked at it some. I looked back in, I mean, most of the references I found that go back to like Exodus, Leviticus.
Right.
And it's always mentioned in relation to some kind of offering.
It is an offering, yes. Let me just, for those of you who don't have any references on it, Jake's right, there's a whole bunch. And again, you could put in first fruits under Bible Gateway, and they'll just give you list after list after list. There's a lot, especially in the Old Testament, but there's also some in the New Testament. Yeah, Exodus 23 talks about it. Leviticus 23. Deuteronomy 26. Jesus is called the first fruits of the dead, 1 Corinthians 15:20. Okay. So, you know, look those up and see. It was one of their feasts, and they had to offer the first part of their what do you call it? The harvest. Real complicated word. First part of the harvest had to be given to God. It's the first fruits. Now you think about that, if you're in an agrarian society, what time of the year are your stores going to be at the lowest? Not winter.
Early fall.
Why early fall?
Well, because that would be the end of what you got from the year before. So the new harvest would be coming in later in the fall.
Right. So well, obviously different things grow at different times, but your stores are going to be at the lowest. And I think this is what you're saying, Shana, right before you harvest.
Right.
Okay? Because you're going to refresh it.
Right.
And so God's saying, give me the first fruits as an act of faith. for more to come. And then for you to chew on a little bit, if Jesus is the first fruits of the dead, what does that mean? More to come. We promise. Okay. All righty. Well, I do want to move on, but I hope you can, just because we're changing gears here from observations to interpretation, your notes are always should be open to any new observations. Okay. We're turning now the corner from what does it say? You remember that in observations to interpretation. What does it mean? And we're going to spend really this week and week 5 and 4 on that. And primarily what I want to do right now is talk about something called context, okay? Because I did tell you, if you ever want to study just part of a book, then the context is important. You want to make sure you understand that paragraph or that story, that story of Jesus, for example, of how he multiplied the loaves and fish. What is it in the overall package there? How does it fit? Let me give you an illustration. I'm going to share my screen here a little bit. Okay. Now, let's just for a moment, just to introduce this idea of context, let's talk about words in themselves, okay? If I said to you all, blue, does that tell you anything?
No.
Well, I don't mean orange. I don't mean stop sign, right? I don't mean dog. Words are like this fence. All alone, they don't do a whole lot of good, nor do they tell us a lot of definition and meaning, does it? You see this individual fence?
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't help us a lot. Now, we could say, well, you can look this up in a dictionary. Dictionaries do not tell you what words mean. And you say, sure they do. No, they don't. Dictionaries tell you how words are used. So as words change in their meaning, a dictionary will start to reflect that. All right. Maybe you see every year in the news, usually in January, they come out with Webster's new additions to their dictionary. Well, that's because words are added, words are changing. All right. So out of context, a word you can see here does like this fence, like this piece of fence doesn't do any good. Words need context. So here we have a whole bunch of pieces of fence. And you can imagine each one of those is a word. Now we have a definition. Now we have a context. We have a shape. Okay? So think now a little more broadly when I'll unshare this now. Think a little more broadly about a verse or even a book. Christians love to take verses out of context. And one of the best and worst things to happen with Bible study is the addition of chapter and verse numbers. Because originally they weren't put in there. The only actual chapter numbers were in the Psalms. Okay? But they still didn't even have any verse numbers. So those were added when it just is, I think it was like 18 something when the New Testament was done. But they didn't have it in Jesus's time. When he quotes from Isaiah, he's kind of skimming through. He opens up the scroll and he's skimming through and he finds the spot, but he didn't have chapter and verse numbers. Now, those are great to help us find things, right? But the problem is they tend to encourage taking a verse out of context. My first Bible was the NASB, but they start every verse on a new line. It's like, I don't know about that. It'd be better if you kept it within paragraphs. Okay. So, you got to watch for the context. Now, let me show you a couple examples. And I mentioned this to Sarah and Derek. Did either of you look up Psalm 118? Okay. All right. So the worship leader gets up in the morning and he says, "Hey, good morning, church. This is the day that the Lord has made, and we're going to rejoice and be glad in it." Now, what day is the worship leader talking about? Not hard.
Sunday.
Talking about Sunday morning. Okay. Now, does God make every day?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Of course he does. Of course he's the author of every day. Of course, never mind that the earth is spinning constantly and there's always a new day going on, but let's not get confused. All right. Yes, God makes every day. But that passage is from Psalm 118. What day did the psalm writer mean? And how do you find out? Derek, I see a hand. What is it? Unmute yourself.
I believe it's the day of the resurrection.
Well, let's look. I might challenge you a little bit on that. Okay, I'm going to share. Let's see here. There we go. I have this pulled up on Bible Gateway. I think you're close, Derek. Okay. Here we go. Verse 24. This is the day that the Lord has made. Let us rejoice and be glad in it. Do you see it?
Mm-hmm.
Nod at me if you all see that.
Yes.
All right. Now, when we talk about context, we're talking about the verses around it, or even the whole chapter. I'm just going to back up to verse 22, so 2 verses up. The stone that the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. Who's that talking about?
Jesus.
Jesus. He's the rejected cornerstone. Who rejected him?
Jews.
The Jews, the leaders, right? Okay. So so this verse is applied over and over again to Jesus. This is the Lord's doing. What is the Lord's doing? What did he just say? The rejection of the cornerstone is the Lord's doing. So first of all, that's a bit of a mind blower that God himself was orchestrating the rejection of Jesus. And look here, it is marvelous in our eyes. Okay? So this is the Lord's doing, and then 24, this is the day that the Lord has made. So now what day is that talking about? What day was the stone rejected? We have a word for it, term.
The crucifixion?
Good Friday. And then let us rejoice and be glad in it. What does it refer to? The day. And that day is the day he was rejected. So Derek, I'm going to disagree with you a little bit. While
I was off by a few days.
what's that?
I was just off by a couple days.
You're up. Yeah. Okay, we'll give it to you. But I think the day that verse is talking about is Good Friday. That's the day the stone was rejected on that day. And the Lord did it all. He orchestrated it all. And he made that day. And we're going to rejoice because of that day, as dark as it was. Okay? How did I know that? Because I'm brilliant? Because I went to Bible college? No, I just read it. Okay? Let me show you another one. I'm going to go all the way to 1 Timothy chapter 1. Okay, here we go. Just a second. I'm going to try and trying to format the screen a little bit so it will all fit. Okay, all right. I'm just going to use this side so you could all see it. All right. Okay. Look at verse 18 with me. Remember, we're thinking about context. This charge I entrust to you, Timothy, my child, in accordance with the prophecies previously made about you, that by them you may wage the good warfare, holding faith and a good conscience. By rejecting this, some have made shipwreck of their faith, among whom are Hymenaeus and Alexander, whom I have handed over to Satan, that they may be taught not to blaspheme. Heavy duty, huh? Now, what happened to Hymenaeus and Alexander? Paul handed them over to Satan that they won't blaspheme. Did these guys lose their salvation? If they did, I got a problem with a whole bunch of other verses. Okay? But it says they've shipwrecked their faith. So what does that mean? Well, I did a little context study, and actually it was part of it was a word study. I looked up this word faith. All right? Now, the way faith is used is it can be saving faith, or by grace you have been saved through faith, like Ephesians 2. Faith could also mean to trust something. You are all putting your faith in a chair right now. Okay? Could mean that. The other thing it can mean is the doctrines that we hold. So when I say that, keep the faith, keep preaching the faith, I'm talking about the truth of the gospel. All right, so do you see those three definitions? Nod or thumbs up or something so I can see that you're with me. Okay. So what I did is I said, well, I wonder how Paul uses this word faith in this letter to Timothy. Every time, I should say almost every time, it refers to that set of doctrines. Now, there's a couple times it's vague, but it could be the set of doctrines. But he never in this letter does he talk about faith as saving faith, like Ephesians 2. Never in this letter to Timothy does he talk about trusting faith, like trusting in the chair you're sitting on. And so I said, well, if every time in this letter he's talking about doctrine, then it makes sense to me that what Hymenaeus and Alexander have shipwrecked is doctrine. They're false teachers. And then just so you know, this handing over to Satan is actually a form of church discipline. Okay. So how did I learn that? I looked at the context of the book. Oh, and one more thing. Hold on a minute. You look at 2 verse 1. First of all, then I heard that supplication, prayers, and thanksgiving be made for all people. Well, Hymenaeus and Alexander are part of all people. So Paul's saying, look, pray for these guys and everyone else too. So both of those things teach us about the importance of context. Questions or comments? Okay. So it may or may not come into play when you're doing some of your interpreting and so forth as you get into 2 Thessalonians. Okay. Now, what I'd like you to do, and I'm gonna, those you have the notes, I'm gonna change them a little bit. I am going to challenge you to outline your book, but before you do, let me kind of give you an example of what I mean. Okay. The first thing you need to do, though, before you start thinking about what does this mean, is look at the book again. Look at your observations. Look at the repetitions. Look at the transitional words. Okay. Just refamiliarize yourself with what the book says. Okay. The next thing to do in terms of interpreting is to try and outline it. So let me again do a screen share. What I've done here is I've outlined Romans chapter 12. Okay. I've been working on Romans in my own personal devotion for a while. And if you're familiar with Romans, there is a huge transition between chapter 11 and the rest of the book. If you remember when we talked about the genre of epistles, we talked about how Paul a lot of times will have a section of doctrine, and then he'll tell you, okay, this is now how you live because of that doctrine. Again, not every one of his letters follows that exactly. Ephesians does, Colossians does, Romans certainly does. And the first 11 chapters is some heavy, heavy doctrine. Okay? Then he goes into verse 12, or chapter 12, verse 1, I appeal to you, therefore. Okay? Huge transition word. And he's going to give them a command to present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable. And then he's going to, in chapter 2, say this other command, do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed. All right? So what I'm doing in my outline is I'm really just summarizing things. Sometimes I'm using Paul's words. Sometimes I'm using my words. So you don't have to use a classic Roman outline like I did. See how I have Roman numeral 1 there? And then A, B, C, D. I kind of use the word defaults. And by word, I mean MS Word. Okay. You could indent, you could do your own outlining. My actual, when I do a sermon, I do something similar, but I use bullet points. It's just, again, there's not a right or wrong way. But I'm thinking in terms of main point and subpoints. And you think, gee, Joe, that kind of sounds like the grammar we did too. Exactly. The difference is, you're not gonna, you may or may not outline every sentence with this kind of outline. Some sentences may be subordinate to others. You remember back in English class where you had to come up with a topic sentence, and then your teacher said you have to give 3 supporting sentences and then a review sentence. Do you remember those? Okay. So think now paragraphs. So what I did is I divided Romans into 1, 2, 3, 4 paragraphs. Okay? And really the way I see this chapter is, while I made Roman numeral 2 and 3 and 4, really these subpoints are the 2, 3, and 4 really could be indented more as they fall all under this number 1. But I chose to do it this way. So what's my first one? So I summarize, in light of our sin and Jesus's payment, and you'll just have to trust me for that that's what chapters 1 and 11 is. Paul said we should present our bodies as living sacrifice. We should not conform to the world. We are transformed in our mind. And now Paul will list specific ways to be transformed. See the following. Okay? I'm not going to read the whole chapter here, but notice here I put transformation specific, transformation specific, transformation specific. So these kind of fit under that main point. The first thing he talks about is thinking as one body. And so he describes that in 12:3-8, which is about spiritual gifts. Okay. So again, I summarized, don't be arrogant, think soberly. We're one body, but with unique members, and each member should do his or her part. Okay. So you see, I'm moving from what does it say to what does it mean? Then he goes on, he leaves that subtopic and he comes to this one, specific commands that reflect the transformed mind. So now in 9-18, he has a whole bunch of commands, and it's almost a list, okay? And so it's, genuine love, abhor evil, hold fast to what is good, love with love. I like love one another with brotherly affection. That's kind of what it means. Outdo each other in honor, be zealous and fervent, rejoice and be patient. So since Paul listed it, I listed them. And then lastly, he wrote down this thing, don't take revenge. He takes, 4 or 5 verses here talking about revenge. So I saw that as more than just these listed items. And so I put bless instead of persecute. Feed your enemy when they're hungry. Give them a drink when they're thirsty. And then Paul uses this figure of speech. You'll heap coals on their head. Okay? And then he says, oh, God will avenge and overcome evil with good. So that's my outline of Romans chapter 12. I've started to make some interpretive decisions. Okay? So what I would challenge you now all to do, there we go, is to outline all of 2 Thessalonians. Not right now. Okay? A couple cautions. Remember earlier today, I told you that the chapter and verse numbers were added hundreds of years after the book was written. All right? So that's someone's interpretation. Often, most of the time, chapter and verse divisions make sense. Okay? So don't be surprised if your divisions follow chapter divisions. Okay? But just in the future, when you're reading, be aware of that. In Philippians, as we're studying it on Sunday morning, there's a couple times we actually go over into another chapter. Okay? The other thing is, your modern Bible translators for English, and I'm trying to think one that doesn't do this. They've put the paragraph divisions or section divisions in themselves. Okay? So they might title it with something. And they may or may not be correct. So it's one of the reasons why we took all those out, so you wouldn't be distracted by them. Most of the time, again, they're pretty good, but just know that title, okay, is added. It's someone's interpretation. It's not the inspired word of God. In fact, and again, I hope you don't think I'm ripping on the NASB, because I love it. It was my first Bible as a new believer. I was raised Catholic, and so to me, a Bible was those big heavy things on the coffee table, you know, and I didn't know they came in, you know, handy sizes like this. And my first one was a New American Standard. I still have my very first Bible in my shelf, so I do love it. But they put subject headings on the very top, and one time it was a little awkward because they put John the Baptist beheaded, and then right after that they put 5,000 fed. So look it up. So again, it's okay to, well, no, I am agreeing with the division or the paragraph divisions. NIV, for example, tends to have more paragraphs than other translations. It's okay if you agree, but just realize that it wasn't actually written that way. Paul didn't put in indentations when he wrote his letters, okay? So I'm going to challenge you, though, to outline it, find your paragraphs, and then put your summaries underneath them, okay? I find it helpful to do what I did in that Romans example, to put each just, again, you can cut and paste. It's so easy now. Cut and paste the actual paragraph and then outline it. If you want that Romans chapter as an example, send me an email and I'll send it back to you. Okay? So I'm going to challenge you to do that. If you're looking at your notes, it says to write a one-sentence summary of the book. I'm going to ask you to not quite pause that. I am going to say think about it. If you had to summarize all of 2 Thessalonians in one sentence, think about it. But next week, I'm going to show you a tool that will help you to do that. And if you remember, let me pull this out. Long ago and far away, you were given these. You remember these pages in your printouts? It's just, can you see that okay? Okay. If you don't have them, it's okay. All right. You could draw your own out as well. But we're gonna use these next week to make our charts. And this is a tool that will help us really boil the book down into one sentence. Okay. When we started, I said what Bible study starts off doing is looking at all the individual puzzle pieces. Now we're starting to put the pieces together. And we're starting to say, okay, this piece goes here, this piece goes there. That's what another way to look at interpretation. Questions or comments? Okay. I don't know why my voice is going, but it is. And so for whatever reason, it's just about done. I've hardly talked at all today. So if there are no questions or comments, I will release you all. And as always, if you have questions or you're stuck on something, contact me. I'd be happy to talk to you. I love talking this stuff. But try to outline your book. And again, if you want to see that example from Romans, shoot me an email and I'll send it off to you. All righty? Last chance.
All right, one quick. You recommend the NIV exhaustive concordance. If we use the ESV version in our personal study most often, is it like, would that work the same if we bought the ESV version?
Yeah, here's the deal. We're just talking about the concordance, okay? Both translations have their strengths. Again, I lean towards ESV, NASB, but as any translation is going to have, lack of a better word, bias. Okay. However, when it comes to the concordance is the only concordance that has a tool that will allow you to do a word study without knowing Greek and Hebrew. Okay. Now, what you might want to do before you rush out and get one is wait until I show you how to do it. and you might say, you know what? I think I want that tool in my library. Okay. There are other tools or other ways to do word studies without that. But remember, when we're talking, like today, I talked about faith. Remember, it could be doctrine. It could be saving faith. It could be trust. So how do you know, unless you know Greek, how do you know that word pistis, which is the Greek word for faith, if you see trust in your English translation, how do you know if that's pistis or not? Okay. And so what the concordance tool does is that it essentially makes every word into a number, which it's the different, if you think, oh, my Strong's done that. The Strong's does that, but it doesn't do the other thing, okay, is it will tell you not just everywhere that word appears in English, it will tell you everywhere where that word appears in Greek or Hebrew. Okay? And that's, so if you know your numbers, if you could identify a 4-digit number, you could do this tool. But before you rush out and do it, get one. I just recommend wait until I show you, and you might think it's worth it to get that one just for that tool. What I think I'm going to do as well is I actually have one of the first editions, but I know Kathy Paula, she attends our ZPV campus. She just got the new one, and that tool is a little bit different. I think they improved on it a little bit. So I might borrow her copy. That way it's clear. But that's really the difference. So it's not a matter of better or worse, only in the sense that it's the only one with that tool. And when you see the tool, you're going to think this took a lot of work to do, and it did. I actually took a course from Dr. Goodrick, and I took his friend Kohlenberger, who co-wrote it, told us about how hard it was, just tedious work it was to write a concordance. Because an exhaustive concordance has every single word listed, including the thes, the ands, every word, and it'll tell you where to find them. So it's huge. Dr. Goodrick was actually a longshoreman, huge monster of a man. And I remember I met him after class and shook his hand. It's one of those guys where he's so big, his hand just swallows up half your arm. Gentlest guy though you'll ever meet. He's actually with the Lord now, but he's a very sweet guy. But he had quite a testimony of fights and all these other things, and then God made him into a Greek scholar. It's kind of neat. So, all right, my friends. Again, I'm really forcing my voice here to tell you about Kohlenberger. Anything else, though? All righty. Have a great night. Stay cool. And oh, the other thing is I got to talk to Cam. We'll have hopefully all of these sessions on YouTube, so we won't lose them forever. All right. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Welcome.